Marcus never imagined that accidentally clicking on the wrong Facebook account would uncover a decade-long incestuous affair that would destroy multiple families, lead to a tragic death, and ultimately transform his understanding of love, trauma, and redemption. At 26, this devoted stepfather's discovery of his wife's betrayal with her own cousin would set in motion a chain of events so devastating that it would take a full year to comprehend the magnitude of what had been hidden in plain sight. The discovery that changed everything came exactly 1 year ago, during what should have been an ordinary evening of checking social media. Marcus sat down to browse Facebook when he noticed he had a message notification. Without thinking carefully, he clicked on the notification, only to realize that he was actually viewing his wife Sarah's account rather than his own. What Marcus found in those messages would shatter his understanding of his marriage and his wife's character. The messages were of an explicitly sexual nature, sent from someone identified as Max, Sarah's cousin. This wasn't a recent development or a moment of weakness, but evidence of an ongoing intimate relationship that violated both marriage vows and fundamental social taboos. The initial shock of discovering these messages was compounded by the realization that this wasn't just adultery, it was incest. The affair partner wasn't a stranger or even a friend, but a blood relative, adding layers of psychological complexity and family devastation that typical infidelity cases don't involve. Marcus's discovery triggered an investigation that would reveal the true scope of the betrayal. Within 3 weeks of finding those initial messages, Marcus had connected with Max's wife, Sherry, and together they began uncovering evidence of the affair that stretched back over a decade, reaching as far back as the early days of social media platforms like MySpace. The collaborative investigation between Marcus and Sherry revealed that this wasn't a recent affair or a temporary lapse in judgment, but a sustained relationship that had been maintained through multiple platforms and across many years. The evidence they collected painted a picture of systematic deception that had been occurring throughout Marcus's entire relationship with Sarah. The emotional support that Marcus and Sherry provided each other during this investigation gradually evolved into something deeper. Both were processing the trauma of discovering their spouse's betrayal, and their shared experience of uncovering the same devastating affair created a unique bond between them. Have you ever found comfort and understanding with someone who is going through the same trauma as you? How does shared experiences of betrayal create unexpected connections between people? The relationship that developed between Marcus and Sherry moved beyond emotional support into romance, demonstrating how trauma can sometimes lead to unexpected and profound connections. Their relationship progressed quickly, and within a year of discovering the affair, Sherry had become the mother of Marcus's first biological child. The revelation of the incestuous affair sent shockwaves through both extended families, creating divisions and conflicts that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. The taboo nature of the relationship made it impossible for family members to remain neutral or uninvolved in the fallout. Max's response to the exposure of the affair was tragic and extreme. Faced with the destruction of his marriage, the loss of his family relationships, and the social consequences of the incest revelation, Max ingested a lethal amount of antifreeze in what appeared to be either a suicide attempt or a desperate cry for help. The medical professionals who treated Max provided disturbing insights into his final actions. According to the doctors, Max had consumed precisely the amount of antifreeze needed to kill himself, suggesting either careful calculation of a suicide attempt or a cry for help that went tragically wrong. Max's death added another layer of trauma and complexity to an already devastating situation. What had begun as the discovery of an affair now involved a death that may have been directly caused by the exposure of the relationship, creating guilt and additional emotional burdens for everyone involved. The aftermath of Max's death revealed the extent to which family loyalties and blame could shift based on circumstances. Initially, Max's family had supported Sherry and blamed Max for the affair, painting him as a predator who had somehow coerced or abused Sarah into the relationship. However, Max's death completely changed the family dynamics and blame attribution. Once Max was no longer alive to bear responsibility, the family's anger and blame shifted entirely to Sarah, transforming her from a perceived victim into the primary villain of the situation. Sarah's transformation from a seemingly innocent wife into a family pariah demonstrated how quickly social support can disappear when the full extent of someone's actions becomes known. She went from being defended by Max's family to being openly hated and despised by them. How does grief and loss change the way families assign blame and responsibility? Can someone's death alter how we view their actions and the actions of others involved? The practical consequences of Max's death extended beyond emotional trauma to housing and financial security. Sherry had been living on property owned by Max's parents, and their withdrawal of support following his death left her in a precarious situation. Max's parents' decision to retract their support for Sherry after his death demonstrated how complicated family loyalties become when tragedy intersects with scandal. Their initial support had been based on viewing her as a victim, but Max's death apparently changed their perspective on the entire situation. Facing potential eviction and uncertain about her safety, Sherry made the decision to move in with Marcus. This practical arrangement strengthened their relationship while also providing both of them with emotional support during an incredibly difficult period. The family's rejection of Sarah's was complete and devastating. She was no longer welcome at family gatherings, and her relationships with extended family members were permanently severed. The only family connection she maintained were with her own parents, and even that relationship was strained and complicated. The fact that Sarah's parents hadn't completely disowned her appeared to be primarily motivated by their relationship with Marcus's former stepson rather than any desire to maintain a relationship with Sarah herself. This dynamic illustrated how children often become the only bridge maintaining family connections after devastating betrayals. Marcus had been serving as a stepfather to Sarah's son throughout their marriage, developing a paternal relationship with a child he had been raising since the boy was only a few months old. This relationship represented one of the most painful losses in the entire situation. After the affair was discovered and the marriage ended, Sarah had initially allowed Marcus to continue seeing his stepson, recognizing the importance of maintaining that relationship for the child's well-being. However, this arrangement became complicated when Sarah learned about Marcus's new relationship with Sherry. The revelation of Marcus's relationship with Sherry triggered a vindictive response from Sarah that demonstrated her continued selfishness and manipulation. Despite having conducted a decade-long affair herself, Sarah had the audacity to use Marcus's new relationship as justification for cutting off his access to the child he had helped raise. Sarah's hypocrisy in fighting Marcus over his relationship with another woman after he had discovered her 10-year affair illustrated the extent of her narcissism and inability to take responsibility for her own actions. She was essentially punishing the child and Marcus for her own behavior. How do you handle someone who uses children as weapons after their own infidelity is discovered? Is it fair for an ex-spouse to cut off step-parent relationships as punishment for moving on? The custody battle over the stepson created additional trauma for Marcus, who found himself fighting for a relationship with a child he loved but had no legal rights to maintain. This situation highlighted one of the most painful aspects of step-parenting, the vulnerability that comes from loving a child without legal protection. Marcus ultimately made the difficult decision to walk away from the custody fight, recognizing that the ongoing conflict between him and Sarah would likely cause more harm to the child than his absence. This choice required tremendous sacrifice and emotional maturity. The decision to step away from the stepson's life was based on Marcus's recognition that the constant fighting and his lack of legal authority would create an unstable and potentially traumatic environment for the child. He prioritized the boy's well-being over his own desire to maintain the relationship. Marcus and Sherry's relationship progressed to the point where they relocated to her home state, where Marcus found new employment and they began building a life together. This geographic move represented both a practical fresh start and a symbolic break from the trauma of their previous lives. The couple's commitment to addressing the unusual circumstances of their relationship led them to seek both individual and couples therapy. They recognized that relationships formed in the aftermath of trauma face unique challenges and require professional guidance to navigate successfully. Both Marcus and Sherry understood that their love story would never be a conventional one that they could easily share with others, especially their future children. The circumstances of how they met and fell in love were inextricably linked to devastating betrayal and tragedy. The therapy process helped Marcus understand how his own family background had influenced his marriage to Sarah in ways he hadn't previously recognized. His parents' troubled relationship had shaped his understanding of what constituted a normal marriage, creating blind spots that prevented him from recognizing problems in his own relationship. Marcus's parents maintained a loveless marriage characterized by conflict and dysfunction. But Marcus had learned to equate the absence of open fighting with relationship health. This misunderstanding had prevented him from recognizing that his marriage to Sarah was fundamentally unhealthy, despite the lack of obvious conflict. The therapy revealed that Sarah had likely never truly loved Marcus, and that their marriage had been maintained through avoidance and emotional distance rather than genuine intimacy and connection. The absence of fighting had masked a complete lack of authentic emotional engagement. Can a relationship be fundamentally unhealthy even if there's no obvious conflict? How do childhood experiences of dysfunctional relationships affect our ability to recognize healthy versus unhealthy dynamics? Marcus's realization that quiet didn't equal healthy represented a crucial breakthrough in understanding relationship dynamics. His childhood had taught him that the absence of visible conflict was the best he could hope for in a relationship, preventing him from seeking genuine happiness and connection. Sherry's backstory revealed another pattern of manipulation and control that had characterized her relationship with Max. She had been systematically isolated and made dependent, losing her education, career prospects, and social connections in the process. Max had convinced Sherry to abandon her education and move in with him, effectively cutting her off from her support systems and future opportunities. This isolation made it much more difficult for her to leave the relationship or recognize how unhealthy it had become. The control extended to preventing Sherry from working, which eliminated her financial independence and made her completely dependent on Max for survival. This financial control is a classic tactic used by abusers to trap their victims in relationships. Max's revelation that he was bisexual and would be seeing men every so often represented another layer of betrayal and manipulation. Rather than having an honest conversation about his sexuality before their relationship became serious, he waited until Sherry was completely dependent on him before revealing this information. Sherry's acceptance of Max's outside relationships with men demonstrated how effectively she had been conditioned to suppress her own needs and boundaries. The isolation and dependency had made it seem impossible for her to object to arrangements that violated her expectations of their relationship. The recovery process for Sherry involved reclaiming her independence and autonomy after years of having no control over her own life. Marcus supported her efforts to obtain her GED, recognizing that she needed to have options and choices rather than being dependent on him. How do you help someone rebuild their sense of agency and independence after years of being controlled? What's the difference between providing support and creating new forms of dependency? While Marcus was happy to provide for Sherry and their child, he understood that true healing required her to have the freedom to make her own choices about work, education, and life direction. This represented a fundamentally different approach to partnership than what she had experienced with Max. The update on Sarah's life following the affair revelation painted a picture of continued poor decision-making and self-destructive behavior. Her arrest following an altercation with a parking enforcement officer revealed additional problems with prescription drug abuse. The discovery that Sarah had been doctor shopping for prescription medications suggested that her problems extended beyond the affair into substance abuse issues. This pattern of deceptive behavior was consistent with her ability to maintain a decade-long affair while appearing to be a devoted wife. Sarah's 3 weeks of jail time for the prescription drug charges seemed minimal given the scope of her problems, but it represented a continuation of the consequences that had been mounting since the affair was discovered. The custody battle over Marcus's former stepson had shifted to involve Sarah's parents, who were fighting to obtain custody of the child. This development suggested that Sarah's problems had become severe enough that her own parents didn't trust her to provide adequate care. The involvement of Sarah's parents in the custody battle indicated that the child's welfare had become a serious concern, with multiple adults working to protect him from the instability and chaos that had become characteristic of Sarah's life. Marcus's reflection on the past year acknowledged the support he had received from online communities during the most difficult period of his life. The advice and encouragement from strangers on the internet had played a crucial role in helping him navigate the complex emotional and practical challenges he faced. The story demonstrated how online communities can provide valuable support and perspective during personal crises, especially when the situations involved are too complex or sensitive to discuss easily with people in one's immediate social circle. The 1-year time frame of the update provided perspective on how much can change in a relatively short period when foundational truths about relationships and family dynamics are suddenly revealed. The ripple effects of discovering the affair continued to reshape multiple lives long after the initial revelation. Marcus's journey from discovering his wife's incestuous affair to building a new life with Sherry and their child illustrated both the devastating consequences of betrayal and the possibility of finding love and healing in unexpected places. The story served as a reminder that healing from betrayal and trauma is possible, but it requires honest self-examination, professional support, and the courage to build something entirely new rather than trying to repair what was fundamentally broken. How do you rebuild your life when everything you thought you knew about your past turns out to be a lie? What does it take to trust your judgment about relationships after being so thoroughly deceived? The complexity of the situation, involving incest, suicide, custody battles, and substance abuse, demonstrated how a single act of betrayal can create cascading consequences that affect multiple families and generations. The affair's discovery had triggered a series of events that changed everyone involved. Marcus's decision to walk away from his stepson, while painful, represented the kind of difficult choice that prioritizes a child's well-being over an adult's desires. His recognition that ongoing conflict would harm the boy more than his absence showed remarkable emotional maturity. The geographic relocation and fresh start that Marcus and Sherry pursued provided them with space to build their relationship away from the ongoing drama and complications of their previous lives. Sometimes healing requires complete separation from toxic situations and people. The therapy work that both Marcus and Sherry committed to demonstrated their understanding that relationships formed in trauma require intentional work to become healthy and sustainable. They weren't content to simply fall in love. They wanted to build a foundation for lasting partnership. The story ultimately illustrated that while betrayal and trauma can destroy lives and relationships, they can also create opportunities for genuine connection, personal growth, and the development of healthier relationship patterns. Marcus and Sherry's journey from victims of betrayal to partners in healing showed that redemption and new beginnings are possible even after the most devastating discoveries.